All right, tried this yesterday and literally melted, so we're going a little earlier and a little quicker, I think maybe. So welcome to what is probably still Ryan Runs in some form or another, and is probably still evolving in one form or another, I think. And this could change, and probably will a little bit from episode to episode, depending on the subject. I think it's going to be a little bit of a history lesson for me more than anybody, and a bit of an experience builder for my daughter here and there. Again, this is going to be the continuation of the shows I'm doing during lockdown, essentially furloughed from 1 out of 3 jobs, if you don't count this one, and looking for games to play with the family, basically. So this might be a little bit of that, but it'll also be a lot of bit of me talking about old games that I should have played by now, that everybody knows about, and that there's plenty of material on out there if you look it up. But I'm going to keep my notes here, my internet over here. Again, you'll be lucky you get some gameplay down there in the corner. And this week we're going to talk about Streets of Rage, which obviously is a continuation on from what we talked about last time with the whole Capcom beat 'em up collection. Again, a pretty narrow view. And I'm not going to, I guess I'll get a little broader if you put the both together, but for the most part, again, staying pretty narrow with just Streets of Rage, which I never played before, because as you know, growing up in the 80s, 90s-ish, you're one kid or the other. And I was a Super Nintendo kid. Greatly envied all the Genesis kids out there. I didn't know how much until I played a franchise like Streets of Rage. So again, if you're looking for something of a history lesson, and I do mean something, I'm going to go through what I learned and how we enjoyed playing Streets of Rage, beginning with the first. In fact, I should mention that, not a plug, but all of these I was able to get my hands on because Games with Gold did a freebie on the trilogy collection that I think came out for 360 or might have been repackaged at some point after the fact. And we'll get all the way to Streets of Rage 4, which came out on Game Pass. So, not that I didn't have to pay for them, but I had to pay for them in a different way that was indirect and more palatable for me, I guess. But Streets of Rage 1, so me and my daughter sat down and basically looked for similarities between what we had already played. And again, if I'm going to sound stupid, I might sound stupid from the very beginning, might as well. I'm picking some of these out as kind of educational tools because my daughter is being homeschooled for the most part, or for the half part. I don't know what the percentage breakdown is there, but we're having to do some ourselves. And while, you know, my wife's doing a fantastic job, of course, I'm doing a fantastic job also when it comes to video games. So I'm picking games that there's no way she would have had any experience with, and not only the game itself, but the environment. You know, that Capcom collection even had surprises for me. As little as I did get to the arcade, I never had enough money to just pump quarters into any machine. In fact, if there was a contest, the Jurassic Park pinball machine probably beat out any actual arcade game. But teaching her about arcades, teaching her about why this game was designed like it was, and the same exact opportunity with Streets of Rage, because, and this is a tenuous example maybe, but much like the Halo franchise became that thing, or I guess Halo 1 specifically became that game that was made for consoles. It brought shooters to the console. Streets of Rage, to me, from what I've read, seems like the game that brought beat 'em ups to the console. And yeah, all those games we talked about and more were all getting console ports, like I mentioned at the end of the last video, but they were all kneecapped in one way or another. Some of them still very good. I mean, I still have fond memories of Final Fight, but I never remembered that it was only single player. So this franchise, Streets of Rage, beginning with the first 91, which if you think about the last video again, you're talking about Captain Commando, King of Dragons, Knights of the Round, all came out in 91. The genre's doing just fine. It's in its heyday, you could say, if you were old and wanted to explain that something was popular in a time period. Sega themselves being no stranger to that genre or even having a hit in that genre, they were enjoying all sorts of success with Golden Axe. In fact, I believe the designer, and I apologize in advance, several times, Noriyoshi Oba, used the Golden Axe engine for Streets of Rage. So basically, not only did he have Golden Axe, he also had just about the greatest hits up until that point. He had Final Fight. And yeah, Final Fight had, we talked about it, had Double Dragon, it had Renegade, I guess was the one you always hear about, to draw from. Oba also had Final Fight to draw from, and he did. And he did in a way that kind of paid homage, but I didn't realize how much initially, having played the game, really mirrors Final Fight in a lot of different ways, both with the levels, just straight up. I mean, you got an elevator, factory, bridge, you've got the streets. Check it out. In fact, it kind of goes in order too. It's kind of strange. But he had the same media to draw from. You know, Final Fight, famously drawing from movies. They in fact name Streets of Fire. Streets of Rage is like, okay, we'll just be a Streets of something else then even. The main characters, you're looking at some more 80s bands pulls like Axel. Also Adam and Blaze are the other three. They're going to show up in all four of the games. But Oba also cites, instead of movies, he cites TV shows like Starsky and Hutch or The A-Team, which I also think is pretty instructive because Final Fight is more cinematic and yes, was dealing with more horsepower, which is probably why. But I think it was smart to pull, obviously, from maybe less ambitious forms of media to draw inspiration from. So he cites stuff like that. He does important things. I call them concessions because, again, we're dealing with traditionally very punishing game types, especially in the arcade where they're looking to get quarters out of you. But for console, he was able to make some concessions. So we get 2-player, we get longer levels. You know, they don't mind so much that you hang around. They're not trying to both get you to play the game and get you to stop playing the game as soon as possible. The controller, the Genesis controller, does have that third button, but it's not like they lean on it a whole bunch. I think at best they use it, if I remember, there's a combo. I'm dealing with kind of an emulated version again on the 360, but they have a little diagram there with the controller that you can assign different buttons to if you want. I want to say there was a 2-button press that resulted in like a rear kick or something like that I never really used. But the special was maybe assigned to that third button. Not terribly different. You know, at best they were like, you don't have to press both at the same time. Consoles. But it meant that they weren't deviating from the norm all that much. You know, they were being smart about it. Speaking of specials, they come externally, they clear the screen, but also they don't take away health, which I don't know if I mentioned that last video, but I love. And for every single game, they mess with that formula, and to differing success, we'll see. But there are important gameplay concessions. Again, I'll say you can reverse an attack. If they grab you, you can turn it around and throw them. You can save yourself from throws. If you hit up an A, I think it is, you'll land on your feet and won't take any damage. And just overall, there's a bigger move set. You know, they can take their time with a more complicated system because, you know, these things come with manuals. They actually tell you how to play the game without having to learn and spend money doing it. Well, I guess you still have to spend money. Again, very complicated relationship with spending money this episode. Again, I mentioned the characters, Adam, Blaze, and Axel. Those will show up in all 4 games in one form or another. They're all ex-cops. The city has been taken over by an evil crime syndicate, which I believe might just be called the Syndicate. Mr. X is at the head of that, and basically you take to the streets to clean them up and beat up Mr. X. Again, you're not looking at a very deep story, definitely nothing deeper than we already talked about for those other Capcom games, but the way it's surfaced is just as good. You know, you might get a kind of a cut scene in there. There's a little bit of setup at the beginning, I believe. In fact, I should have made notes, but one of them you have to actually wait. It just comes up with the title screen. But most of them, like Final Foot, will that could have been called that. That actually still works if you think about it. Will front load. You know, the first thing that comes up is that telephone ringing. You know, Mike Hagar having to go save his daughter. So. The story, again, I'm the only one that cares, so that's that, but it's there. And honestly, the game itself, Streets of Rage 1, is fun and solid. And me and my daughter had a blast. You can hurt each other in Streets of Rage 1, and I think actually all of these games. So why that's important, not only is because it looks super weird, because most of the time, again, on these games, if you like sidle up to an enemy is how you grab them and you can throw them or something like that. So we're mashing away and accidentally sidle up against each other, and one of us will grab the other. And then rather than, we finally learned not to throw the other person immediately, but what that looks like then is just everything freezes and we're basically hugging in the middle of a fist fight, which isn't rare. Look it up on YouTube. But matters the most in Streets of Rage 1, because by the time you get to the end of the game, you can do another thing on accident if you're lucky. When you fight Mr. X, if it's 2-player, he will ask you to join him. And I believe if it's single player and you do, it sends you back to like level 5, and then you do the levels again until you can decide to beat him or become the boss or something. Like, I forget. I didn't do that because we were doing it 2-player, and you can choose different options. So for whatever reason, somehow, and I forget who did what, one of us said yes and one of us said no, and all of a sudden we're fighting each other. So I killed my daughter and went back to level 5, and then same thing, if you beat it again, you take over or something like that. But it was pretty cool because it felt like, we had been at each other's throats the whole game anyways, accidentally grabbing and throwing each other here and there. So it just seemed fitting that one of us finally killed the other in the end and took over the crime syndicate. The other thing I'll say about Streets of Rage 1, having said that it's solid and fun and we loved it, it has that feel, and this still happens to me nowadays. I'll be playing a game and I'll be thinking, wow, this is good, this is solid, but it's got just that feeling that the sequel could be great, And I got that. Maybe it's too retrospective in a point of view, but here playing Streets of Rage 1, I felt that. I was like, in Streets of Rage 2 is the one you'll hear the most about. We'll get there. But Streets of Rage 1 does have that feeling of being really, really good. But man, I could see with some tweaks, this is great. And one of those is also with the music. You'll hear about Yuzo Koshiro's soundtrack all day long, almost automatically and immediately whenever you hear somebody talk about Streets of Rage. And they're not wrong. That is a catchy bunch of music, not just catchy even. And it's not even music that's necessarily in my wheelhouse, something I'll go to a concert for, but it's something that you would listen to outside of the game, right? And again, this is all old news. I know, I get that, all right? If these videos are going to be anything, it's going to be me talking about the most obvious stuff because I haven't played these games before. So it'll get experiential. But again, I agree. It's good stuff. It's good music. And it doesn't get any worse for Streets of Rage 2. 92, only a year later. And I guess they employed 4 teams for the thing, which seems like, when the game seems small like that back in the day, I guess you don't assume that kind of the same practices that you'll get nowadays. In fact, if you think about it, Streets of Rage 2 with 4 teams had more teams working on it than Streets of Rage 4, which came out in 2020. So in any event, they were able to pump it out within a year, which might be scary, especially again when the genre itself is enjoying so much popularity that you're getting not necessarily cash-ins, and even, this is definitely a retrospective view, even if you think about some of the games we talked about for the Capcom Beat 'em Up collection, there wasn't a ton to them, but maybe it is rose-colored glasses. They're still fun. Like, it's still cool to go back and experience. For me, anyways, this is something I'm trying to instill in my daughter as we go, because it's very easy to play a game like that and just gloss over just about everything. I pressed X for an hour, on the next. So Streets of Rage 2 comes out, and once again, I don't know with how many games this is going to happen, but it seems like every single one gets a better title in Japan, where it's named Bare Knuckle 2, The Requiem for a Deadly Battle. So forget about that, and you can enjoy the game a little bit more. Blaze and Axel are back. Adam has been damseled, though, it turns out. So his little brother, comes to the rescue, named, I guess depending on where you're at, Sammy or Eddie. But it doesn't matter because his nickname is Skate, so I picked him because I rode a skateboard at some point. So Wasn't let down, but the reasoning was flimsy. So they're brought into the game as well. Did I mention Max as well? Max Thunder or Max Hatchet, if you're in Japan, which again, I still think is the better one. That's closer than Requiem for a Deadly Battle, which is definitely the better one. But and the reason it panned out choosing Skate, though, was that a lot of the gameplay enhancements, I feel like, came with that character. He's the only one that can run. He gets a blitz attack, which I think I mentioned in the other video. If you're playing a beat 'em up and you find out that you can press forward attack, or if you're running and you hit an attack, if you can do that, do it, because it's kind of like a special without losing health, which, funnily enough, you do in Streets of Rage 2. They're kind of back to the normal industry or genre standard where you use a special and you lose some health. So you can't just spam it, which I get. I get the gameplay implications of being able to spam a special move. Although, did Turtles in Time let you spam that 2-button move? I think it did. Maybe that's why it's a better game. But it's not all that they do to enhance the gameplay. It's definitely not all that they do to enhance the game for Streets of Rage 2. You'll hear about the sprites being bigger. In fact, I want to say they were able to achieve a lot of this because they were unhappy with the cartridge specs. So they themselves buffed up the cartridges so that they could do all they wanted to do with this game. In fact, it looks like they might have reached a whopping 16 megabytes, if I'm reading this correctly. But it plays better. It sounds better. I really did enjoy Skate as a character because it's quicker. The game plays quicker. And not just in a way, I feel like games will make that mistake where, well, everybody got really good at the last game, so we got to make this one more difficult or more something. You know, it's always the trouble with sequels, right? More, but does it evolve? Does it actually add anything? And Streets of Rage 2 obviously does. They add more characters, they add more detail to the environments. They, I believe, might even add more environments. Streets of Rage 2 has also 8 levels. They do not, the same amount of environments, but still, they look good. They add more music, and again, this is the soundtrack even that you'll hear about the most, which I also agree with, hot take, and luckily enough was the one when we get to Streets of Rage 4 that they included the most music from, it seems. So in a lot of ways, I can't wait to talk about Streets of Rage 4. So Streets of Rage 2, everything you've heard is correct if what you heard was good. Streets of Rage 3, I would say everything you've heard is not correct, actually. 1994 is when it came out, so again, we've got a jump from just a 2-year, 92, right? Yeah, so we've got 2 years later, but it's also when, I want to say, Armored, what was the Armored, Capcom Armored something rather? Capcom's Armored something rather game from the other video came out, which basically signaling that the genre was kind of in decline. And we talked about Street Fighter 2 coming to consoles as well and kind of charting the fall. You know, in a lot of ways, it's like a teeter-totter between the beat-em-ups and fighting games. And the genre was on its way down, so we got games like that Capcom game we talked about, like Streets of Rage 3, that appear to have kind of a kitchen sink approach where more is definitely more, you know? Axel and Blaze are back, which... Okay. You can go on the internet and find paragraphs about just about everybody, about Axel, of course, about Adam, about the enemies, even the bosses like Shiva, which does come back as playable in a couple of the games. Rue the Kangaroo, which is from Streets of Rage 3, which is cool. I like that there's, again, the kitchen sink approach isn't always bad. You're definitely going to get some good with that, even if overall it might be too much, or out of that you're just like, it doesn't actually add anything. They had unlockable characters. You could unlock and play as Shiva at some point. You could unlock and play as this kangaroo with boxing gloves at some point. I'm telling you, it's a good game. But there's paragraphs on all these. There's even a paragraph on Ash who doesn't even show up in the US version, which actually I guess, yeah, you could write a paragraph on that dude. We won't get into it. Even Robot Axel, who's essentially, his whole story is Axel but robot. It gets like a paragraph of stuff and people texting me all at the same time. And then you get to Blaze, the lone female in the group, just about, and there's about a sentence. I think. So, shouldn't be a surprise. Women did not get great representation, but that's all fixed now, so it's great. Everything's great. The other character you're going to get in this game is Dr. Zan, who I guess is working for, the story. So Mr. X is back in a way. He's gone legit. He's the head of RoboSci, a corporation that has involved itself with replacing key officials or all officials in the city, which I believe is like Wood Oak or something like that, I don't know, with robots in order to, quote unquote, take over the city, which is a wonderful, just a beautiful 80s, but 90s, whatever, thing to do. A bad guy thing to do. But when you think about it, what does taking over a city do, essentially, in the end? Like, what's the plan after that? You can't even really see that leading to takeover of a greater area, really. What do you do with the city once taken over? I guess it's just... So, they're trying to do that with robot body snatchers, but it turns out that when you fight, and okay, this is maybe my least favorite. It's a weird, bittersweet thing about Streets of Rage 3. There are multiple endings again, but in the States, they're gated by difficulty. So if you're playing through on easy, which me and my daughter are, even though we were gated at level 5 by playing through on easy, there is a level select, or you can just switch to the Japanese version on any of these games in this collection, which is cool. To find out that Mr. X is not a robot, he was just observing that plan, but he is a brain in a jar at this point. So if you get far enough, you get past Dr. Dom, I think is his name, the guy that he hired to do stuff, and you get to actually fight Brain in Jar, which is harder than it sounds because I think he's controlling a mech that you have to fight. I don't know. On easy, it's totally cool, you know, and we'll get way more into this with Streets of Rage 4, but to me, easy is where it's at most of the time, and I don't mean that in a bad way, and I get that there is a modicum of nostalgia that goes along with the difficulty, especially in some of these games, but you know what it is? Yeah, I'm just old. I don't got the time anymore. I don't have the time anymore. So, old man says that. Along with all that kitchen sink stuff we've talked about so far, the gameplay doesn't do any less of it. It seems they picked up on the fact that people were maining skate like I was, because everybody can run now. Each character does a blitz attack, and with that, the blitz attacks can be upgraded. That's what the forward attacks, blitz attack. If you're holding a weapon, there's a special blitz attack for every weapon, and basically just the whole thing is a bunch quicker. And honestly, I liked it. It's quicker is a good substitution for harder for me, and I guess there was definitely a difficulty jump that came with this. In fact, one of the stupidest things I read, Old Man Difficulty says over here, is that in Japan, English normal is harder than Japanese hard, basically is what it came out to. So in Japan, they're just living it up. They're like, oh man, this game's so fun and easy, it's breezy. But that's the thing too, is it's not. Like, there is a perfect, you know, not super duper hard. I forget what was I guess there is some, it's probably more than a conspiracy out there that this was also when strategy guides were going hot and heavy. So a lot of games, I guess, saw difficulty increases, and this genre is historically difficult, so whatever. But to sell strategy guides, I wouldn't doubt it. That might have been it, but in Japan, apparently it didn't matter. So me and my daughter put in the level select, we get to the end, and everything blows up or something like that. I can't remember exactly. I took screenshots of all these, which I should post, but the grand consensus, even though me and my daughter still had fun with it, even though I would say Streets of Rage 3 is obviously still worth playing, the grand consensus is that it's the least of the three. And I guess that might be true, because the first game, Streets of Rage 1, has the first game appeal, I guess you could say, and the third one is just, this is the thing. Sequels always have to deal with, well, even if they're as good as the one that came before it, they're still going to get, well, it's just more of the same. And that's definitely a critique I can get behind most of the time, especially nowadays with 40-hour games and stuff like that. but we're polishing these off in like 2 hours. And again, not going super deep, playing through on easy, but you get more Streets of Rage 2 and Streets of Rage 3 for a couple of hours. This is definitely a retrospective opinion, but I'm all right with that. The music also gets a lot of guff, which and again, there's a bunch of stuff out there you can look up on this. Some of it's good, I'll say, glass half full. The music, though, according to Koshiro, is more experimental because he wanted to advance what was being done. He wanted to, and I was surprised often to hear about how integral he was to the game besides just the music, besides just producing great tracks. He was also the man that, I guess, brought several sequel ideas to Sega over the years after Streets of Rage 3. So the fact that he wanted to experiment with the music, I'm actually totally cool with. And yeah, it might make for, I forget how he put it, less melodic entries in the end, but, you know, I like that. That makes a good and varied catalog. You know, you mix it up with Streets of Rage 1 and 2, you'll be just fine. How about that? Streets of Rage 4. So 26 years later, this game came out in 2020. So yeah, I played a game and I'm going to talk about it in the same year that it came out. And I'm going to do it poorly. Oh gosh, I know already. I need to bring up that there's a splash screen if you pause the game that will show you all the controls, because obviously at this point the genre itself is solidified, like its history is cemented essentially. And yes, I'm dealing with some blind spots here because I haven't played a lot of the most recent entries in the beat 'em up genre. Castle Crashers is one I know you'll hear about a lot, which somebody somewhere is like, oh man, you haven't played Castle Crashers? I haven't played Castle Crashers, but I haven't played any of the new ones, really. So some of the innovations I talk about might have already happened somewhere else. This might be something that people have been playing with in this space as of late for a while. I don't know. But I know that coming out at this point, I mean, there's not a lot of beat 'em ups, and regardless, you're either going to play on nostalgia or you are going to try and evolve the genre, which to me seems like a daunting task in 2020 with beat 'em ups in particular, and with Streets of Rage, the franchise, which is now so beloved by me included now that I've played it. But honestly, I think they nailed it with Streets of Rage 4. And I think the story behind it is a big reason why. So you have 3, again, I mentioned developers, French developers, which I'm not saying I'm not saying that like that's a surprise or amazing, or French developers, just that they're not Japanese, right? So you're dealing with an entirely different country, an entirely different group of developers, obviously. Yuso's in there, and we'll get to him in one way or another. But approach Sega themselves with this idea, and I guess they've largely made their money. And they remade Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap, which came out in 1989. They remade it in 2017, and I haven't played the original or the remake, but just looking at it, looks like it was made with love, if that's something you can tell from a distance. And the fact that they would approach Sega and be like, hey, can we make Streets of Rage 4, I think already speaks volumes. I would at the very least rather it was that than the other way around, right? Sega's just kind of shopping it around to somebody. Not that that can't produce something, but I feel like more often than not, it just shows an amount of love that I think needed to be there, especially for this. So they sit down, they start this thing, they come up with a story where it's not quite Streets of Rage 3 bonkers, but Mr. X had some kids. Lots of people had some kids. Adam also had a kid. And I guess first and foremost, Axel, Adam, Blaze, Zan is not back. They omitted Dr. Zan from, I think it was Dr. Zan. I believe he was a doctor from Streets of Rage 3. But Mr. X's kids, the Y twins, have set up their own crime syndicate, are also trying to take over a city again. But this time by way of brainwashing the citizens with music. So a great, kind of classic story, really, which I'm totally fine with, and is told pretty beautifully, at least, let's put it. It sticks to the format cutscene level. You're not really going to get anything out of the ordinary. There's no like fun mid-level additions to what's going on or any dialogue even or something like that. But the cutscenes are really good looking. The art, maybe we do the art now. Like, I'm one of those people that looks at an obvious old game with new art, new HD sprites, if you can even still call them that, attached to it, and kind of gets turned off, if not completely, then initially. So yeah, I looked at this, and I think Mega Man did it too pretty recently, didn't they? I believe. Never played that. That was kind of a reason. In fact, I was like, this looks good. I think it reviewed okay too, and I'm like, I just don't know. And I just didn't know looking at this thing. Not that I had any of the reverence for the franchise yet, because again, I hadn't played anything, but it was on my radar. I played it at PAX, I want to say twice at least, and I had heard about some of their gameplay developments where not only did you have specials, you kind of had ults, which even just, again, me not knowing much less about beat 'em ups than I know now, especially after these two videos, thinking, pressing X for 2 hours plus A sometimes for a big explosion, I think I'm into that. And having played it and not even garnering much more than that at PAX, was still into it. I'm pretty sure I talked about it on the PAX shows or even just since, or some of the news segments in Zero Hit Points or something like that, I don't know. So, yes, the art style gave me pause because I'm incorrect. But everything else that it had going for it kept me attached, kept me kind of waiting for it. And then when it came out on Game Pass, what else was I going to do? So Blaze, Axel, Adam are back. Adam's kid brother Skate, also his daughter Cherry, I believe. Zan's protege or son, I think, named Floyd is there. I believe he's a Maori dude. A really cool cast of characters, and that didn't end there. Like, as you progress through the level, there's scoring now, and it takes your scoring into a lifetime total, and once you hit certain milestones, you unlock new characters. Once you're done unlocking the cast of characters they created for Streets of Rage 4, you start to unlock all of the characters from all the other games. Streets of Rage 1, Axel. Streets of Rage 2, Axel. Streets of Rage 3, Axel. And on down the line for Blaze, Adam, if it was in there. I don't think Shiva or Rue showed up. Did they? I'll have to look at it again. It's been, I think, a couple months since I wrapped, but freaking rad, okay? Like, I don't care. I love, it's not even an Easter egg at that point, but I love the callbacks in Streets of Rage 4. Everything they did to pay tribute to where they were coming from, the game that they were not even cribbing from. Like, this is a legitimate entry in that franchise. So, and it didn't end there, actually. There was if you're moving through the level, I don't know if I got this on the gameplay that you're hopefully seeing down in the corner, but if you get a taser from one of the cops, you can beat up cops in this game, and then use it to stab, I don't know how you say that, to tase an arcade machine, you'll go into a retro boss battle, and they have one. They obviously don't have all the bosses, but they have kind of the greatest hits in there. And it was totally cool. I love stuff like that. Also, it was low risk because the health you lost there didn't carry over to the next. You could actually get additional points for it. So if you're trying to S rank it, it was a good thing to do too. Which, by the way, there's S ranks in this thing. With the scoring that did add up, it also per level gave you a ranking, which eventually we'll get to the achievements, I suppose. Yeah, I'm looking for achievements. And this had one for S ranking every level on hard, which seemed possible at the outset. I don't know why, because I couldn't S rank. I don't think we S ranked a single level playing through on easy. But even, I don't even know if there are concessions at this point, because designing one of these games nowadays, I feel like you can't. There is an arcade mode here where you can, basically you have, I don't even think there's any continues. You basically just have an amount of lives. You do gain extra lives by getting more points, but if you die, you're done. The game over. If you lose all of your lives, I should say. So it does have that mode, but for the most part, if you fail a level, you're just going back to the beginning of that level and you can try again. And it has, I forget what they call them, assists, I believe, where you can give yourself more stars, which is what you use for the ults, I guess you could say. In fact, so the gameplay, I think, is probably where they took the greatest stab at evolving the genre, which, smart. And I think they nailed it also. And again, I'm going to have to look at something for this. So X is still attack, A is still jump. They made pickup and throw on separate buttons, so you can pick up food or weapons with B. Again, if you're playing Xbox or whatever it is, I guess I'll try to remain agnostic here. But then when it comes to the specials, which we found out I'm very interested in, there's a defensive one that you get for hitting special while you're standing still. If you're doing a directional forward, you'll do an offensive special. If you jump and hit it in the air, you'll do an air special. And while at first that was just fun, and me and my daughter totally loved experimenting with that and doing them at different times, they do drain health, but it's a different color on your health bar. And if you do enough damage to enemies after that, you can earn that health back, which honestly, I think is my favorite way it's been done in the entire series. Yes, I love the idea of not having to lose health at all, but gamifying it in this way and in such a rewarding way and in such an achievable way too. Like, not that you have to sit there and not get hit at all during the level, although if you're going for the S ranks, that's definitely one way to do it. But you just got to be good for a little while longer and you get all that back. You know, most of the time everybody's on their back because you just did a special move anyway. So to me, it introduced a really cool aspect to it. So that's page 1 of the move set. Page 2, you can hold X for a strong attack. Never really used it. Forward X is a blitz move. Used it all the freaking time. Back attack is here still. I don't believe I used much. No, in fact, I didn't use that at all because in playing, and eventually I switched to playing with a D-pad. If you play with a stick, you are more apt to accidentally input what it thinks is back. So a lot of times I would be hitting and it would do a back attack for no reason. So I actually turned that off. Again, all the buttons are customizable in this game. Turned it off. So I didn't do it on accident at all. I would recommend that as well if you're going for X ranks. RB, you'll hit your star move, your ult, whatever. There's still grabs. Once you grab them, you can sit there and hit them for a while or throw them, whatever you want to do. Vaulting is back. You can grab them and then flip over them. It's been in every game as well. Also, you can catch things. So if an enemy throws something at you, you can pick it up. If you throw something at an enemy and it bounces off them and comes back to you, you can pick it up. There's one actual boomerang in the game, but if you're throwing a weapon at somebody and it bounces far enough back, you can just catch it and keep throwing it at them until the weapon disintegrates, which is pretty great. And they make special mention that went right over my head until, again, I went back for, we'll get there, for S ranks. Defensive special, right? Hit Y or hit the defensive special button without any directionals if somebody's coming at you, and they won't be able to interrupt your combo. Because if you're looking at that gameplay footage, you'll notice that combo counter in the corner. And they've made a big deal about how you can combo people off the walls and stuff like that. I don't know that I did that all that much, especially when I was looking to get S ranks. You basically just want to keep that combo up as high as possible. I forget the actual monikers, but the color changes the higher you go, and if it gets pink or red, you're gravy. Like, you can pull an S rank out of one of those alone sometimes. In fact, if you are going through and trying to get S ranks on hard, that would probably be my top advice, is that pick a part at the beginning of the level, because you don't want to be doing it at the end, because then if you miss it, you got to redo the whole level, right? At the beginning of the level, where you can string your attacks together enough to get up in that pink or red area. And then if you get one of those at the beginning of the level and then do okay for the rest, you're usually gold. So that was kind of my technique. You're probably not seeing it in the footage below because, again, I came back and recorded that footage a little bit later, but also I wasn't necessarily trying to do great in those videos. I think you still get some blue combos though, if I'm not mistaken. So not only basically to keep your combo going, the other things you have to keep in mind are that pickups keep the combo going, weapon hits keep the combo going. So really it becomes this loop of, yes, beating people up, having to avoid their attacks, hitting Y at the right times to special so that you don't get damaged, or so that you throw everybody off you right before they're about to damage you. But then you're breaking trash cans to keep the combo going. That counts as a hit. You're picking up food to keep the combo going. And you'll notice once you start getting into this that it's all strategically placed to, very smartly so, keep that combo going to get that multiplier up. In the end, it became, yes, intermittently frustrating, let's say, but looking back, I really enjoyed that process. Like that, they figured out the loop to that game. And if you look at reviews for Streets of Rage 4, some of them are fairly middling, which, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion, obviously, but it barely mentions stuff like that. So yeah, while I can't necessarily expect a reviewer to go back and especially try to get all of the achievements, it's not, I don't know that that adds anything, but in this case it did, because I got a deeper appreciation for what I believe they were trying to do. Like, the game operates on its own as a better than competent beat 'em up. Like, I don't know if it's better than Streets of Rage 2. I'll be one of those guys. But it might be my second favorite of the group. And it's definitely, regardless, you know, the deepest of the four. And part of that is getting that score up, keeping that combo going. So really smart additions and just a really great game overall. And I think they took their greatest stab at the moveset, at the actual gameplay, at that loop, to evolve the genre. And for my 2 cents, it does. Like, this is the next step. This is a modern beat 'em up in the best sense of the word. This isn't an evolution like, I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm playing Arkham Asylum with my daughter as well. In fact, almost as a reaction against this, or as a tempering of this, because she's still kind of in the button mashy phase, which is fine, and gets the job done, especially in games like this. But, you know, you could easily see Arkham Asylum being an evolution, especially with how tight that battle system is. You know, she's having to be a bit more purposeful and thoughtful with her button presses, which is what I was hoping for. So I'm not even, Streets of Rage 4 isn't that, right? It isn't like, oh, this is eventually what the beat 'em up came to, and this is, you know, all that. It's taking that genre as narrowly defined, perhaps, as cemented in history already, and bringing it into the modern day. And I think it does a great job with it. So Streets of Rage 4, highly recommended. And I think with all those callbacks and all those additions that do, you know, maybe tick that nostalgia box, I think it's a great continuation of the franchise as well. You know, maybe you're not into the whole, the kids are part of it too now. I don't know. Did you like Mortal Kombat 10? I thought that was all right too. Cassie Cage is funny. Streets of Rage 4 is worth playing. It's also got, you know, the whole, in fact, both of these collections have that thing where they do all the galleries and the collections and the, what do you call that, concept art, you know, and all that stuff. And I'll say it, if I've seemed lukewarm on the art for this game, I got into it and fully accepted it. In fact, now when I look at it, I'm like, man, this is actually gorgeous. You come to appreciate it on its own terms. It probably, so Skate was my main again. In fact, Streets of Rage 3 Skate, I think it was. Again, you're probably looking at the footage, but that became my main for Streets of Rage 4 because he has his defensive special, which they map differently for the classic characters, but his defensive special is kind of this windmill where he just punches across the screen a bunch of times. And since it also has distance to it, I could use it to keep that combo going. So if I'm about to get hit, I can combo, get the person off my back, but also travel across the screen to get to whatever's happening next. So also I want to say he's still faster than everybody else in that game. So play Skate. Just play Skate. Also play the game Skate. That's a good game. So I think that might be it. I think we might have done it. Next week, it won't be next week, but next video, I might do Contra. That ended up not being as much of a family play as I wanted it to be, which might sound like a surprise, but it's 2-player, right? Should have been, could have been. Ended up being a little more difficult with a little less continuations, but is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I probably won't be able to resist actually looking up information on it. So that could be the next one. In any event, if you've got ideas yourself, you can find me on the internet any number of places. We still do our thing over at Book Club for Movies at zerohitpoints.com, bookclubformovies.com. I think this last week we kind of just shot the breeze for a while, which is another thing old people say. It means to talk about the movie that you didn't say you would do that past week. But we're doing All the President's Men next week, and I think TV volleyball after that, which, if that sounds confusing, it is. So check me out there. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. It's not hard to find. It's probably somewhere on the same page right here. I don't know. See you next time.